If Elon Musk tried to cash out tomorrow, the fortune would vanish in minutes. December 2024, his net worth crossed $400 billion. Headlines exploded, social media filled with calculations, divided among everyone, and each person gets $50. Problem solved. But nobody asked the question that economists whispered in closed rooms late at night. What happens when he tries to sell? He sat in his office at SpaceX headquarters, scrolling through the posts. People angry, people calculating, people demanding he distribute the wealth. The number glowed on every screen, $400 billion. It looked real. It looked like money sitting in a vault somewhere, waiting to be handed out. He didn't respond to the posts. He had learned years ago that explaining economic reality to those who believed in the number was impossible. They saw $400 billion. He saw something else entirely. The wealth wasn't cash, it was shares. 51% of SpaceX, 13% of Tesla, stakes in X, Neuralink, Boring Company, paper valuations based on what someone else might pay if he wanted to sell. And that was the trap nobody understood. The moment he wanted to sell, the value would collapse. His finance team had run the simulation 3 years earlier. A private exercise, no press, no announcements, just raw numbers and brutal honesty. They modeled what would happen if he attempted to liquidate even 10% of his Tesla holdings. The computers crunched the data, market depth, trading volume, investor psychology. The results came back within hours. Catastrophic. Selling 1% would trigger algorithmic trading systems across every exchange. High-frequency traders would detect the pattern in microseconds. Sell orders would flood the market. The stock price would drop 15% before he finished selling 2%. By 5%, institutional investors would panic. By 8%, margin calls would force smaller shareholders to liquidate. By 10%, Tesla's market cap would have fallen by 40%. His remaining 90% would be worth less than the original 100%. He would destroy his own wealth trying to access it. But that wasn't the part that kept economists awake at night. The simulation continued. They modeled the ripple effects. Tesla suppliers watching their largest customers' stock collapse would pull back on production contracts. Banks holding Tesla bonds would downgrade their risk assessment. The EV industry, which had rallied around Tesla's valuation as proof of concept, would face a crisis of confidence. Rivian, Lucid, dozens of startups building on the assumption that electric vehicles were the future, their stocks would crater in sympathy. Pension funds holding those stocks would report massive losses. Retirement accounts would shrink. The wealth destruction wouldn't stop at Musk's fortune. It would cascade through the entire system. He had explained this once in an interview 3 years back. The reporter hadn't understood. But the money exists, she insisted. It's right there in your net worth. He tried a different approach, told her to imagine a painting worth $50 million, only worth that much because someone else believes they can sell it for $51 million. The moment everyone tries to sell, there are no buyers. The price falls to whatever desperate sellers will accept. Sometimes that's $5 million, sometimes it's $50,000. The wealth never existed as actual transferable value. It existed as collective belief. The reporter published the interview. The quote went viral, not for the reason he hoped. People accused him of hiding money, of making excuses, of protecting wealth he didn't want to share. They didn't understand that he was describing a mathematical reality that applied to every major shareholder of every company in history. Wealth at that scale isn't liquid. It's locked in a system that only works when nobody tries to leave.
3 weeks after that interview, a congressman proposed a wealth tax,
Tax the billionaires, force them to pay based on their net worth, not their income. Economists from MIT and Stanford published responses within days. They explained what Musk had tried to explain. To pay a wealth tax on shares, billionaires would have to sell shares. Selling shares in large quantities destroys value. The government would collect less than projected. The market would lose more than collected. Net wealth destruction for everyone. The proposal died in committee, not because of lobbying, because the math didn't work. But still, people returned to the same question. Why not just give it away? Sell it slowly, distribute it carefully, make everyone wealthier. He had considered this too, run the numbers with his team. If he sold his entire stake in Tesla and SpaceX over 10 years, being careful to minimize market impact, and then distributed that wealth equally among every human on Earth, each person would receive approximately $47. $47. Once. Not annually, not recurring, a one-time payment that would change nothing about anyone's circumstances while destroying the companies that employed hundreds of thousands of people and drove innovation in electric vehicles and space exploration. The calculation appeared simple until someone asked what happened next month. Tesla would have a new controlling shareholder, probably a consortium of institutional investors, private equity, hedge funds. Their incentive would be quarterly returns, not long-term moonshots. The gigafactories that Tesla was building in Texas and Germany, projects with 5-year payback horizons, would be canceled. The investment in full self-driving, which had consumed billions with no profit yet, would be terminated. The company would optimize for immediate returns. Innovation would stop. In 5 years, Tesla would look like every other car company, profitable, stable, and irrelevant. SpaceX would face a different problem: no public market to sell shares. Any buyer would demand control and profit. The Mars architecture would be scrapped immediately. Starship development would halt. The company would refocus on launching satellites for commercial clients. Reliable income, steady growth, no risk. Humanity's path to becoming multiplanetary would end not with a bang, but with a PowerPoint presentation explaining why Mars never made financial sense. He thought about this often, late nights when the engineering problems seemed impossible and the critics seemed loudest. The wealth existed because he maintained control. The moment he gave up control to liquidate it, the wealth would evaporate. It was a paradox. The fortune was real only as long as he didn't try to spend it. His critics saw a man hoarding resources. He saw a man trapped by the very success that created the numbers everyone fixated on. Selling meant destruction. Holding meant accusations. There was no path that satisfied both economic reality and public perception. Morning came. The headlines continued. Another article about wealth inequality. Another calculation about dividing his net worth. Another hashtag trending. He closed the laptop, walked to the factory floor, watched the Model Y production line. 3 years ago, this factory didn't exist. Now it produced a car every 45 seconds. 5,000 people worked here. Most of them owned Tesla stock. Their retirement accounts had grown because the company's value had grown. If he liquidated to give everyone $50, these jobs would vanish when the company collapsed. But nobody wanted to hear that explanation. They wanted the simple story. Rich man hoards money while others suffer. The complex truth that his wealth was an illusion of market valuation, that liquidation would destroy more value than it created, that the system only worked because he stayed locked in, didn't fit the narrative.
He returned to his office as the sun set, opened his laptop. Another message from the board. Shareholders wanted another forward split. Make shares more accessible. Increase liquidity. They thought more trading volume would stabilize the price. He knew better. More liquidity meant more volatility, meant faster collapse if he ever needed to sell. The trap was tightening. Outside, protests gathered at Tesla stores in 3 cities, signs demanding he pay his fair share, numbers on cardboard claiming he could end poverty with a fraction of his wealth. He watched the news coverage in silence, calculated again. Even if he gave every Tesla employee $1 million, a life-changing amount for each person, it would require selling less than 3% of his shares. But selling 3% would trigger the cascade. The stock would fall. Their existing shares would lose value. They would end up poorer than before the gift. Economic reality was merciless. Wealth at this scale operated by different rules than wealth at human scale. $1 million could be withdrawn from a bank and spent. $400 billion existed only as long as nobody tried to touch it. The moment someone reached for it, it would dissolve like morning fog. But there was something else, something he had realized years ago that he never discussed publicly. The wealth wasn't his in any meaningful sense. It belonged to the future, to the engineering problems being solved, to the factories being built, to the cities that would someday exist on Mars. He was merely the custodian, maintaining control so the work could continue. The day he tried to convert it to personal consumption, the future would be canceled to fund the present. And that was the real answer to the question nobody wanted to ask. Why doesn't he distribute the wealth? Because the wealth was never actually his to distribute.